The Zorvani Empire had always been a powerhouse in the galaxy. Their ships were the pinnacle of warfare, their soldiers trained from birth in the art of conquest. They had conquered countless worlds, annihilating those who dared to oppose them and enslaving the weaker species. Yet over the last few centuries, their thirst for expansion had slowed. Resources were becoming scarce, and their empire was stretched thin. They needed allies, and they needed peace. When the human colony on a distant planet began to signal an interest in diplomacy, the Zorvani were intrigued. They had heard stories of humanity, stories of a species that, although primitive in comparison to the galaxy's older races, had shown remarkable tenacity and unexpected resourcefulness. The Zorvani saw an opportunity, one they had not considered in years, a chance to form a new alliance to integrate humanity into their empire peacefully, before it grew too strong to be contained. Zorvani officials debated the best way to approach the humans, but the decision was made. A fleet of diplomacy would be sent. The humans had already communicated their openness to peace talks, and the Zorvani believed that a show of power, balanced with an offer of friendship, would convince the humans to join their empire willingly. On the day the Zorvani fleet arrived near Earth's orbit, it was an impressive sight. Battleships, cruisers, and flagships filled the skies of the small blue planet, each one a symbol of their technological might. The Zorvani had prepared for a display of power, something that would make the humans understand the consequences of refusal, but also offer a path to cooperation. Captain Ilara of the Zorvani flagship, Hesperus, watched through the viewport as Earth's small defense fleet moved into position. It was a token gesture at best. There was no real threat from these humans, at least not in her mind. Yet she kept her expression neutral as the signals from Earth's leaders were intercepted. A message was coming through, welcoming the Zorvani diplomats with open arms. "They are ready," Ilara said calmly to her bridge officers. "Prepare to broadcast our message." The Zorvani ships aligned, their massive hulls casting long shadows over Earth. It was time for peace. Ilara's hands hovered over the communication panel, ready to broadcast the offer of friendship. Her fleet would extend the olive branch, and soon, the humans would see reason. But just as she was about to send the message, the unthinkable happened. The human fleet, which had been so docile just moments before, suddenly began to move in a manner that was anything but peaceful. The ships, though smaller than the Zorvani vessels, maneuvered into tight formations, positioning themselves in front of the Zorvani fleet as if preparing for battle. The Zorvani officers exchanged confused glances. Are they positioning to attack?" one of Ilara's officers asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "They can't be serious," another officer said, shaking their head. "They agreed to peace talks. This is—" Before the officer could finish, the human fleet opened fire. It was swift and it was brutal. Energy beams, missiles, and projectiles slammed into the Zorvani ships with an intensity that was shocking. The humans, despite their lesser technology, fought with a fury that Ilara had not anticipated. The firepower they unleashed was relentless, and the Zorvani ships, taken completely off guard, found themselves in the midst of a full-scale assault. "We are under attack," one of Ilara's officers shouted, his hands scrambling over the controls to raise the shields. But it was too late. The human fleet had already struck their first blow, and the force behind it was more than a simple skirmish. Ilara's mind raced. She had expected a calm, diplomatic exchange, not this. The humans had not only resisted, they had countered with an overwhelming force. She watched as one of the Zorvani battlecruisers took a direct hit to its engines, erupting in flames and plunging into the atmosphere of the planet below. "They're not just fighting, they're destroying us," Ilara muttered under her breath. The Zorvani fleet, usually composed of disciplined soldiers and highly trained warriors, was thrown into disarray. The humans' tactics were unpredictable, each move a challenge to their calculations. They were not fighting with the cold precision of the Zorvani. They fought with a raw, chaotic energy that seemed to refuse any sort of order. Their ships swarmed like hornets, darting in and out of the Zorvani formations, taking out weak points, exploiting every mistake. "This is madness," one officer screamed, unable to believe the carnage unfolding before them. "We have to retaliate. Launch everything we have." Ilara gritted her teeth. There was no time for hesitation. The humans had shown no sign of peace. Their message was clear. If they had wanted diplomacy, they would have sent it. Instead, they chose to attack. The Zorvani ships retaliated with their full force, firing back with missiles and energy blasts that tore through the void of space. But the humans were fast. Their ships danced through the fire, evading hits and striking back with remarkable precision. On the bridge of Hesperus, the air was thick with tension. Ilara had no choice but to command her fleet to fight. But even as they unleashed their power, she could not shake the feeling that this battle was not going the way it should. The humans had refused their offer, rejecting the peace they had so carefully prepared. And yet, as the battle raged on, Ilara found herself thinking something she had never expected. The humans were more dangerous than she had realized. "Continue the assault," she ordered, her voice sharp, but doubt crept into her mind. How long could they sustain this? Another blast shook the flagship and Ilara braced herself. A warning signal flashed on the console. A direct hit to their engines. The Hesperus was crippled. Another series of explosions rocked the ship, and Ilara knew the truth. This was no mere skirmish. The humans had made their decision, and it wasn't one she could undo. Her officers stood frozen, stunned by the turn of events. Ilara, for the first time in her life, understood something profound about the humans. They didn't fight for dominance. They fought for survival, and they would destroy anyone who threatened that. As the Zorvani fleet began to retreat, the human ships continued their assault. The humans had not anticipated peace. They had anticipated war, and they had given it without hesitation. The encounter would go down in history, not as the beginning of a new alliance, but as a reminder that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The Zorvani Empire would learn the hard way that sometimes the greatest threat didn't come from a species with the most power, but from one willing to fight, with everything it had. And in the case of humanity, everything was just the beginning. Omni